Hey guys, it's Lexi, and in this video I'm going to be talking about how to write a CV for dental residency programs. Also, thank you guys so much for helping me reach 100 subscribers. Before we get started, I think it's important to remember that the goal of your CV should be to create an impactful and compelling impression so that whoever's reading your CV is going to want to grant you an interview. You need to consider not only the content that you're writing about, but you also want to consider the presentation. You want to make sure that you have a good balance between not only having really good experiences that you're talking about, but you also want to present them in a way that will be interesting to the person that's reading it, and it'll make them want to invite you for an interview. So here's the outline for the video that I'm going to give you guys today. First, I'm going to talk about the presentation of your CV. Then I'm going to tell you about what kind of content you want to include. And then finally, I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions that you may have. Let's start with presentation. It's important to remember that when you're looking for a good presentation for your CV, you want to focus on consistency. So let's start by taking a look at this example for education on the left. So if we look at the left and you look at the right, at first glance, they're identical. However, there are little errors that we can find on the left side that might not bother you or might not seem significant to you, but when someone's reading your CV, it kind of makes it look sloppy. So the first thing that we notice is if you look after University of Iowa here, there's a comma, and then there is not a comma after any of the other universities mentioned. Another thing that we notice is after all of the degrees that are mentioned, there is a comma in the first degree, DDS, and also after the Bachelor of Science degree, but there is not one after the Master of Sciences degree. That's another inconsistency that you'll want to avoid. You can also see that here after the word biology, there's no comma, but then there is one down here. So again, these might seem like little details, and they are, but they can really be significant in making your CV look professional. And you can see here, everything is corrected and it looks a lot cleaner. So just remember that the details do matter. And another thing I want to point out is what are both of these missing from the education section, but you also want to include the GPA that you had when you attended those universities, and also for dental school, potentially your class rank if you go to a school that provides a class rank. Another thing to consider in terms of how you're going to present the information in your CV is what verbs you're going to use. So you want to make sure that when you're doing your bullet points after each experience, that you're not using the same verb over and over again. So you can see on the example to the left, we say went to national conferences, went to service events, planned the ASDA student elections, went to lunch and learns that I planned an interprofessional conference. So this is a lot of the same verbs over and over, and it can be very boring and bothersome to the person that's reading it. And quite honestly, it doesn't really engage the reader, nor does it really illustrate all of the work that you did when you were part of that club. It kind of makes it seem like you were just passively involved. Whereas if we look at this example on the right, the same activities, the same level of effort that was put in, it's just presented in a different manner. So it makes it seem like this student really did a lot more. They collaborated with other dental professionals. They participated in service events. They conducted ASDA student elections. They organized lunch and learns. They developed an interprofessional conference. It's a lot more interesting to read, and it makes the student seem like they did a whole lot more than this student, even though they're really the same activities and the same participation. Another thing I want to mention in terms of presentation, you might want to consider using columns. So this is honestly to a certain degree personal preference, and you may like the way that certain sections look when it's just a single column, and you may prefer that other sections will be multiple columns. The benefit of using columns is you can take advantage of the horizontal space on a piece of paper. If you're making everything in a long single column list, sometimes that can make it so that you're not really utilizing the full space on the piece of paper, and it can also make your CV seem longer than it really needs to be. So by utilizing multiple columns, it can help you to save space. So you can see this example with education. Perhaps you prefer this form at the top, or maybe you like the way it looks when everything's broken into 3 columns. Or you can see another example for professional affiliations. So here I've got a list of all of the affiliations with the date corresponding, and then here you can see see them in 3-column format. And so again, this is going to be personal preference. Some students might say this looks better. Others might say the one on the bottom looks better. I think it makes it a lot easier for the person that's trying to read it. Another thing to think about is that you can use numbers when you're doing your CV. So for example, let's say you were fundraising chair for a certain club. Instead of just saying that you fundraise for a particular event, if you were able to collect significant amount of money, you can actually put that value of money that you were able to collect, and it might be impressive to the person that's reading it. Another thing is you want to prioritize your bullet points. So make sure you list the most important bullet points first, and that they're not in just a random order. If you're enjoying the video, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's move into the content. Here I have a list of some of the main categories that I would recommend using for your CV. While I do recommend always starting with education, I think that there's some flexibility for the other categories in terms of what order you want to put them in. Before you can go ahead with the content of your CV, you're first going to have to start with the header. Here you're going to include your full name, email address, phone number, and then the city and state in which you live. You can also provide your full mailing address if you would like, but that's not 100% necessary. I would also make sure that your voice mailbox is set up and that it sounds professional in case the admissions committee calls you. It's also better to use your school or professional email address as opposed to a personal email. Another thing to consider is that it's not really necessary to write the word email address : and then provide the email address. Same thing with your phone number, since it's already obvious that your email address is an email, and the same thing for your phone number. So it ends up becoming redundant and it doesn't look as clean and concise. Moving into education, this is where you're going to want to list all of the institutions that you previously attended, as well as your current institution if you're still in dental school. So for this section, if you've already graduated dental school, you would list the year that you started dash the year that you graduated. But if you're still in dental school, you would state the year that you started and then just put a dash and the word present to indicate that you're still in dental school. And you can also put the expected year that you're intending on graduating. You also want to make sure that you include the years that you attended for any previous institution. For your undergraduate, you want to include undergraduate degree that you received. And also if you had a specific minor, you can include that as well. And then of course, whatever it was that you got your degree in. So whatever your major was. And then for any other degrees, you want to list those. So if you have a PhD or a Master's of Science that you got, you want to make sure that you include all of the education history that you have. You want to include the GPA that you received at any of the programs that provided a GPA. And then you want to provide your current GPA for dental school, as well as your class rank. For the honors and awards section, then you can include if you graduated summa cum laude, magna cum laude, or cum laude from your university. If you're a member of OKU in dental school, you could talk about that. You could put your scholarships that you received if they were merit-based. You can also talk about any university, department, or service awards that you received, and basically any other professional awards or honors that you feel would be relevant to this section. The employment or work history section is pretty straightforward. You can mention any jobs that you had that you think would be beneficial for the admissions committee to know about. I would say that if you had a job working at McDonald's when you were 17 and you were just there for a year in high school, I wouldn't include any of those types of jobs in this CV. But if you have something that continued from high school all the way through dental school, say you were a biology tutor that whole time, it would be okay to show that you started the tutoring as a high school student. But otherwise, I wouldn't include any jobs that you had in high school. In terms of leadership experience, you can kind of think of the clubs that you're involved in. Maybe you're fundraising chair, service chair, president of a certain club. This would be the place to put that. You can also include some undergraduate leadership experience if you'd like. Just make sure that it's something that you would think would best represent you to the admissions committee. So you want to make sure that if you're going to include anything from undergrad, that it's the most significant experiences and that you don't just completely copy everything that you had in your undergrad resume into your CV. With that said, if you have limited leadership experience and you feel like it kind of looks awkward to just have a single experience under this section, it is okay to group your leadership experience with the service and extracurricular activities category. For this section on research, you're going to want to include the name of the lab that you worked for, the name of the university, any publications publications that you received, poster presentations, past and current projects, as well as research awards. If you have multiple publications or multiple poster presentations, you could categorize this section into subcategories of your poster presentations as well as your publications. But if you only have a couple of research experiences, it's probably best to just group them all into a single category under research. In terms of service and extracurricular activities, this is where you're going to talk about the clubs that you're part of, service organizations that you volunteered for, specific service events that you participated in, whether they be dental related or not, any shadowing experiences, and then dental related conferences that you attended can go here as well. You want to make sure that you strategically consider the residency that you're applying to, and you want to include activities that are related to that specialty in this section. And you want to highlight all the experiences that you have that are going to show that you've done a lot of work to prepare for this residency program and that you have a lot of related experiences. One approach that you could also take if you feel like you are applying to, say, pediatric dentistry residency and you have a lot of experiences related to pediatric dentistry, you could tailor your CV to have a section specifically on pediatric dentistry experiences. That's not something that you have to do, it's just an option to consider. For certifications and skills, this is basically a section where you can talk about any language ability that you have. Perhaps you're certified in basic life support, or you have specific front desk experience in a dental office. Any other relevant professional skills or certifications that you think would be beneficial to add to your CV, you can put them here. I would not recommend including hobbies. So it's okay to talk about hobbies in your personal statement if they're relevant, or even in an interview setting, but I wouldn't recommend including them in your CV. Finally, for professional affiliations, this would just be a list of all of the professional affiliations that you have. So if you're part of ASDA or the Special Care Dentistry Association, you can put that list here, and you can also include the year that you started your involvement, and then if you're still involved, you can say to present, or you can say when your involvement ended. Here I have a list of a few other categories that you might want to consider including. So externships, especially if you're applying to an oral surgery residency program, those can be useful to list off. If you don't have a lot of externships, for example, let's say you only did one, then it might be better to put it under service and extracurricular activities, because it might look a little bit awkward just putting a single externship. But if you have more than one, it would be beneficial, particularly for the oral surgery residency programs, to list those in their own category. Also, if you have a lot of experiences abroad, you could list that as its own category. Otherwise, you can group the experience abroad into one of the other sections. And then finally, if you're right now a practicing dentist and you've taken multiple continuing education courses, maybe some of them are relevant to the residency that you're applying for, you could also list those off in its own section of your CV. Okay, so now I'm going to wrap up the presentation by running through some frequently asked questions that you may have. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and also hit the notification bell so that you can stay up to date when I upload new videos.